The Art of Being Ruled. Wyndham Lewis. Original publication 1926. 1989 edition. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Part 9. Man and Shaman. Chapter 7. The Roman Exoletos. Although more distant from us in time, a glance at the nature of sexual inversion in the Greek and Roman worlds, the latter especially too near us in many ways, will advance our understanding of its natural place and uses in society. I will take the Roman first, and quote from Professor Dollinger's excellent book, Gentile and Jew in the Courts of the Temple of Christ. Writing in 1860 or thereabouts, for Dollinger paiderastia was an abominable vice, and his attitude one of purely orthodox reprobation. That does not make his account any the less useful in its enlarging of certain lively details, and it gives it a distinct advantage for my purposes. He claims for it a share in the cumulative destruction of Roman society, for instance. With all his knowledge and insight into the history of those periods, it is permissible to doubt if Dollinger realized all the implications of this inversion of normal life. In the earlier centuries of the Republic, Dollinger says that cases of paiderastia were infrequent. From the 5th century onwards, however, in spite of the heavy penalty imposed for prostituting a freeman, instances of male prostitution became more frequent. By the end of the 6th century, Polybius describes this habit as grown general, and mentions a talent as what a Roman was prepared to pay to satisfy this taste. The abuse of man-slaves was a recognized license, and Caius Gracchus boasted publicly of his Roman self-restraint and never having coveted the slave of a neighbor in that way. The Scantinian law, imposing a pecuniary mulct for this offense, fell into disuse. At least it was dormant throughout the empire, only Domitian enforcing it. There was no Roman emperor, this including the best of them, such as Antonius and Trajan, who did not indulge this taste. Caesar's infatuation for the Bithynian king, Nicomedes, Suetonius, Cis. 49, whom he had captured, was the subject of satirical songs among his soldiery during his Gallic triumph. During the last days of the Republic, the handsome sons of senatorial fathers in difficulties served to soften the hearts of such Roman judges as were not accessible to other bribes. All the poets of the Augustan age except Ovid have left the record of their homosexual predilections, and Ovid's reasons for contenting himself with women are, says Dollinger, worthy of the man and the age. With the Romans, homosexuality took a grosser form, as was to be expected, than among the Greeks. The latter poetized it very much more, making it an institution more reminiscent of chivalry than anything. All the unfortunate heats and appetites inseparable from the human state were, as later with chivalrous European love, disguised, in the way that a ham is dressed in paper frills and powdered with toasted crumbs, on an elaborate system of make-believe adapted to the physiological facts of the case. But with the Romans, these accessories and more indirect features were dispensed with. With that Teutonic grossness and taste for raw meat that produced the mortuary games and the gladiatorial contests, they went to this innovation baited by a bald and staring flesh rather than melting insinuation of delectable limbs in the softened light of the more measured Greek imagination. Again, in place of the romantic male friendships intruding everywhere in the Platonic dialogues of Socrates, the Romans were more businesslike. The wealthy Roman would have a harem of male slaves, which he called facetiously a pedagogia. The boys chosen for this harem were called Exoleti. The first step was to castrate them, as this exposed them to abuse the longer, Exoletos suos, ut longiorem patientium impudicitiae donai sint, amputant, Seneca, Contrav, Exc. X. 4. Some considerable trouble was also taken with their education. A certain literary polish was insisted on, to render them more complicated objects of desire, on the same principle that young ladies are taught to sing and paint, the mind thereby playing its part in the long civilized preparation for mating. If a closer contemporary parallel were desired, no doubt it could be found in that peculiar cultural furnishing, rather dainty, sickly, and smart, that an expensive modern university provides, along with aristocratic manners, and an inquiry as to how subsequently it was spent would usually elicit the fact that it served the same purpose as the matrimonial accomplishments of the middle-class girl only, not so much in aiding simple nature as in frustrating her. With the Roman Exoleti, all artifices were resorted to delay the development of the child into the youth, and the youth into the man. Decked out like a woman, as Seneca says of one of these, he wrestles and fights with his years. He must not pass beyond his age of boyhood. He is kept back perforce, and, though robust as a soldier, he retains his smooth chin, his hair is all shaved off, and removed by the roots, Epist. 47. These epicen were sometimes classed together by nations and color, so that all were equally smooth and their hair all of one tint. That they might keep a fresh complexion longer, they were obliged, when on a journey with their master, to cover their face with a mask. It was thus that Clodius on his travels took his Exoleti about with him as well as his women of pleasure. Tiberius, at Capria, and even Trajan, kept such boys in droves, and in those days formal marriages between man and man were introduced, with all the solemnities of ordinary nuptials. On one of these occasions Nero made the Romans exhibit the tokens of a public rejoicing and treat his elect, Sporus, with all the honors of an empress, Dollinger, Gentile and Jew in the courts of the temple of Christ. There again, in Seneca's account of the Roman Exoletos, who wrestles and fights with his years because he must not pass beyond the age of boyhood, we see the reflection of our own time. The crowds of mild and veiled Exoleti produce the impression of people playing children, a childhood that is indefinitely prolonged, for none must pass beyond the age of boyhood. The aged mind, with its devitalization, anxieties, and yearning for youth and its abundant freshness, is thus reproduced in the processes of this supersexual obsession. It is thus that male sex inversion contributes its share to the cult of the child. What becomes of the epicene of the feminine kind? Is a horde of new old maids produced in this way? We know, however, that if he has some personality and intelligence he survives, battered but still mincing, and again there are some big rough men, known to most of us, tweed or corduroy suited, pipe smoking and inverted, not unlike the vigorous transformed shamans described by Bogaras. But they are the exceptions. Most are small, mild, correct, discreetly solicitous, and both the Chukchi bashfulness and the cultural accessories of the Roman Exoleti can be recognized in their invariable mannerisms. There was a Greek proverb to the effect that it was easier to hide 5 elephants under one's arm than one Pathic. The elaborate display of bashfulness and correctness is perhaps the surest advertisement of the presence of a Pathic.